Retro Hangover is supported via Patreon by listeners like you. We would especially like to thank patrons Lyle McCarnes, Tony G, Tom the Superhero, Stud Still Smash the Milkman, Raging Demon, Mast Keaton, Lucas from Game Over Hell, Ozzy Garcia, JC, Megan Caruso, Rick Firestone, Dave Jackson, Jenny E, Retro Overdrive, Soha the Emperor, Storm Beagle, Matt aka Stormageddon, Pete Ross and Van Fernal from Super Garbage Day, Randall Quiggle, Keith Gasper, the Retro Vixen, Eric Guess, Nomad from the Retro Wildlands podcast, Ash Events, Alan Bingham, Mike the Rep from Backbreaker Gaming, Ryan Player One, Alt, Low5 Alex, Renner Dreaming, Omi, Makeshift Money, and Sega Boy 7. Your continued engagement and generous donations are deeply appreciated.
Open your ears and crack some beers. You are listening to the most recent episode of Retro Hangover.
And hello, retro and classic gamers. Welcome to the podcast where we find final fighting fantasies, figuring feelings for flailing fraggles. This is Retro Hangover. I am your co-host, Chris Copleen, with special guest, Phil from Deleted Saves. And, as always, your host, Shane, Super Ripped Dick Mayor Dragon! Center!
Finding feelings for fatal femme fatales. Something like that.
Well,
that's what I would have done.
Well, you didn't.
No,
You
you're
didn't
right.
do that.
I didn't. It's not my shtick.
So now we're down on Fraggle Rock. We're down on Fraggle Rock now. Who hates Fraggle Rock? No one hates Fraggle Rock. Are you hating on the Fraggles?
Is this the part where I admit that I have never in my life seen a single episode of Fraggle Rock?
I don't believe you.
I mean, you can not believe me all you want. It doesn't make it any less true.
I think you're lying.
Nope. That one missed me somehow. I don't know. I missed that cultural zeitgeist.
Clap, clap.
The cheeks?
Down on Fraggle Rock.
Oh.
Clap, clap. Sure. I'm sure they were doing that in Fraggle Rock. And why wouldn't they?
Clapping Fraggle cheeks.
That's how you get more Fraggles.
That's how you get more Fraggles, exactly. Hi, Phil. Welcome
Hi.
to Retro Hangover. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate it.
It's great to have you here. I love your well-crafted, scripted, and articulated show. And it's a pleasure to finally have you on.
The complete antithesis of ours.
Pretty much.
Well, I mean, some would say I'm a piece of crap, but okay. Awesome.
That's what makes it fun, is that you have opinions that everyone can agree with.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I love the fact that, and I know I usually pitch these shows at the end, but definitely go check out Deleted Saves. He has unique takes, but that's what makes it a show worth listening to is, you know, you don't always need an opinion that's going to be within the paradigm of what opinions are for stuff, as we have sometimes done on this show. And it's always good to have a refreshing take from time to time. So I do want to put that out there, Phil, that I do appreciate what you do with your show and the honesty it brings.
Thank you. Like I said, I never try to be inflammatory. I just try to give it from my perspective. And, you know, that's what I do. That's what it is, what it is.
I will say, after your Silent Hill 2 review, I was a little iffy.
So were a lot of people.
But I'm glad you're here now.
You know, I'm not going to beat that horse to death. I've beaten it on other shows. I realize that just because of the nature of that game and the things presented, it set me off in a wrong way to the point where I was like, the fuck this, I'm done with the series. But I do understand that, the arguments for how good, the game can be and what it was trying to display. Again, I think it was just, like I've said this before, 10,000 people get a vaccine and one person gets a rash. Unfortunately, I'm that one person.
Well, everyone else is better for it? I don't know.
I guess. I don't know.
I don't know how to move on from that one.
I am purposefully abstaining from this critical discussion of Silent Hill 2 for reasons.
I have no idea why.
Fair enough.
But as we are wont to do, before we get into today's episode, which is about Final Fight, the beat 'em up from Capcom, we are going to be talking about the games that we have been playing lately. As is tradition, we let our guest go first. Phil, what games have you been playing lately?
My biggest playthrough right now currently is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I don't know about how far in. My PS5 says I'm about 65 hours in, and somewhere in the Cosmo Canyon region, but I have no idea where that actually means as far as this title. But that's been my biggest time sink. Outside of that, I recently completed a game called El Paso Elsewhere, which I'm highly recommending, as it is a cross between From Dusk Till Dawn and Max Payne.
Go on.
It is, you are literally a dude who goes into a hotel in El Paso, Texas, whose job it is to kill Dracula, your former girlfriend. And you have to go through about 50 levels of this cursed hotel and liminal space, shooting the shit out of everything.
Wait. Dracula, your ex-girlfriend?
Turns out it's a title you can inherit in this world.
Okay.
And Dracula intends to destroy humanity. I will say I'm not much of a knowledgeable soundtrack guy, but this soundtrack is pretty good, and I knew it hooked me when it out of nowhere added Tom Lair's Vatican Rag to the list of basically house music.
This is intriguing.
I won't spoil too much of it, but I definitely think it is a worthy time. It's pretty short. I'm going to say between about 8 and 10 hours.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah, this is definitely going on my wish list. I was just looking it up while we were talking about it. This looks like my jam. I don't know how I didn't know about this.
Sunday stream?
But yeah, quite possibly.
I think it would be a good streaming game. I absolutely recommend it. The other game I've been working through is Conscript, which I could best liken to military horror. It's definitely got a lot of survival horror elements, item management, ammunition management, but you are in the trenches of Verdun during World War I. While it's no zombies everywhere, eldritch gods, something like that, it's very obvious that something is wrong with your German opponents, and you're a member of the French resistance fight. Things aren't correct. Something is wrong. And the tension behind this game is, for not having actual boo jump scares and blood dripping and things jumping out of the walls at you, is pretty thick.
When you said military horror, I thought you were going to make a more modern military horror, which is getting emails from people that don't know what they're doing, but I guess that's too universal.
No. I could see that being an issue, but no, this is an actual timepiece.
Okay. Sorry, former military, so I had to put in the joke.
I've never served. I don't know the specifics of it. I'm just seeing more like a vibe and a historic era, being a soldier going through the trenches at Verdun while things are going very wrong.
Yeah, that would be that would actually that would be terrifying. So you said Conscript.
Conscript.
Okay.
Yes, Conscript.
I'll have to check that out. That sounds interesting. I'm more interested in World War I than World War II. I don't think it's explored enough.
No, I mean, you could bury yourself with the average book section explaining World War II. My grandfather fought in World War II, so I got to hear a lot of his stories from his time in the Mediterranean, chasing Rommel and doing 6-man raids into fascist Italy. The time he got lost in the Sahara Desert for 2 days, and the fact that a German pilot went by close enough to see the man's eye color. And the reason he didn't get shot is, I guess the guy was just feeling benevolent that day. But yeah, World War I is way underexplored, despite the absolute chaos that it caused and some of the horrifying innovations that were made.
Yeah. Your grandpa sounds like a badass, by the way. I love that.
He was a hell of a guy.
Nice. Well, Shane, how about yourself? What games have you been playing?
Oh, let's see. What have I been playing? Well, if you happen to stop by our Sunday streams as of late, then you may have seen me playing some Bendy and the Ink Machine. Apparently a meme game for the young kids because it goes spoop and it's like the FNAF or something. I don't know. I wasn't aware of the game's status as such when I started playing it, but it's a relatively short one. I managed to finish it in 2 streams, and the second one we ran a little long, so I think it was like 5 hours total, probably. Not bad. Not terribly scary though. It's got kind of a creepy vibe, of course, but I didn't really. I don't know. I wouldn't rank it up there as one of my favorites, but it wasn't a bad experience. I think it had some pacing issues, which is interesting for a 5-hour game, because even with that short runtime, there were still some sections that I felt were just a lot of padding, unfortunately. But overall, not too bad. Pretty good stream game, I suppose. So there's that. And then I gave Mega Loot another try because it officially released, and there's been some pretty significant updates to it, because I think I talked about this one a while back, and by all rights, it should be something that I really dig. It's like a fairly stripped down, like first person dungeon crawler roguelike, that's supposed to focus mostly on gathering and equipping loot sets. Like that's the whole thing, is it's a ton of loot and there are a bunch of sets that you're supposed to try to strategically equip to like max out your character in the best way that you can. But the way that it was originally implemented was like weirdly antithetical to its own design philosophy. So like it didn't feel great. So I put it down, but I came back to it, I think last week, and it feels better. I think they've moved in the right direction. So I'm fairly happy with that. But I think that's the majority of it, honestly. I mean, I'm still cranking away at Diablo 4. I had a couple events going on. I don't know if one is still happening right now, but still running the seasonal character there. Oh, and on mobile, I picked up, Nintendo released the full version of Animal Crossing Pocket Camp. That used to be a free to play with microtransactions deal after about, I think it ran for roughly 7 years. And after it had shut down, they packaged it all up in a complete pay one time and you get the whole experience sort of thing. And I think I paid like $10 for it, and it's pretty good. It's got, 7 years worth of content in it. If you like Animal Crossing or that style of game, then this is kind of like a light version of that, which works for me. So I can check in on my little pocket camp every so often and make a little bit of progress here and there. But I think that about covers it for me. I don't know. What about you, Chris? What you got going on?
Just playing the game for the next episode in hopes I can possibly get anywhere near close to beating it, which is going to be Legend of Dragoon.
Yes.
We're going to be, right now we're planning to be doing that with Rick Firestone from Pixel Project Radio. I think in 2 weeks I have played a total of 14 hours.
Do you find it all concerning that I have not once mentioned that as part of the games I've been playing?
Maybe. I don't know, because it sounds like you've found some additional time to fit in some extra gaming. I cannot find that time. So I'm wondering what's going to happen when we get to some of the more robust games later on in our schedule, say like maybe a Persona 4 Golden.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going to happen. It's going to be fun. I'm trying to get more game time in, but it just seems like I always have to jam some other event. Not that I'm terribly complaining. Normally these things are fun to do. That's why I do them. I can just tell people no. But at the same time, it's like sometimes the social life in real life is a little bit more important than playing a PlayStation 1 game. So I'm going to try and do whatever I can to catch up, but in real time, in real life, it's also my birthday weekend, so I've gotten the requests to go hang out with people now this weekend when I was hoping to make up for lost time. So damn them for wanting to celebrate my Earth arrival.
Yeah.
Coming out. Yes. Damn them. Bastards. Can't stand it. So yeah, that's what I've been doing. I just really haven't been doing anything else. Just horrible time management. I won't say I don't have time. I have horrible time management. That's what I will chalk it up to. As for the episode, let's get into a game that we are going to talk about, not next time. I'm sure I'm going to have a full playthrough for next time. But for this one, I did beat this game this week, mostly because it's only 30 minutes long. And that game is Final Fight. And Shane.
Yeah.
I think it's your turn. So I'm looking forward to your brief history of Final Fight.
Metro City, a well-known crime capital, has been ruled by violence and death for many years.
While the side-scrolling beat-em-up genre may largely be a relic of the past, save for the occasional nostalgia-driven indie title, there was a time when it dominated local arcades. The early 1990s saw an abundance of these brawlers, with new releases seemingly every fortnight. As we discussed in our Golden Axe episode, this era produced several highly influential games in the genre. However, Final Fight truly set the gold standard for what would follow. Final Fight's development began shortly after Street Fighter's release in 1987. Capcom, encouraged by the success of their 1v1 fighter, initially planned a sequel. They enlisted two programmers from Forgotten Worlds, Akira Nishitani and Akira Yasuda, to design and plan the game. While the team originally set out to create another fighting game, producer Yoshiki Okamoto recognized the success of the Double Dragon series in arcades. This led to a shift in concept towards a beat-em-up, with the working title Street Fighter 89. However, feedback from trade shows indicated that the game felt nothing like Street Fighter. With its new setting, characters, and gameplay mechanics, keeping the same naming convention no longer seemed to make sense. Thus, the game was rebranded as Final Fight. Final Fight was officially released in Japanese arcades on November 25, 1989, with a worldwide release following on December 1st. It was a resounding success, becoming the highest-grossing arcade game in Japan in 1990 and the second highest in the following year, only surpassed by its spiritual successor, Street Fighter II. In the United States, it became the highest-grossing arcade conversion kit of 1990. And globally, over 30,000 arcade units were shipped. Given its critical arcade success, numerous home ports soon followed. The most notable were the Super Nintendo and Sega CD releases. The Super Nintendo version, released between 1990 and 1992 in various regions, was a major commercial success, selling 1.5 million units worldwide. However, it suffered from some technical limitations, leading to the removal of two-player co-op and one of the playable characters, Guy. The Sega CD release in mid-1993 is generally considered the best home port of the era, featuring all three characters, two-player co-op, and a CD-quality soundtrack. It also retained more of the original arcade content, with fewer censorship changes compared to the Super Nintendo version. Since then, Final Fight has seen numerous ports and re-releases across various platforms, from the Game Boy Advance to modern consoles and PC. The series spawned several sequels, though the poorly received Final Fight Streetwise in 2006 effectively ended the franchise. Final Fight's impact on the beat-em-up genre is undeniable, setting a new standard for gameplay and presentation that influenced countless games that followed. And that is your brief history of Final Fight.
All right, thank you, Shane. As we heard, the fight was not final, but it was one of the first ones to really influence the beat-em-up genre in the way that I think most people recognize beat-em-ups today. Not the first true beat-em-up, but one of the stalwarts. I didn't really learn anything new out of the brief history. I didn't really find anything too terribly interesting. Because I think it's like kind of common knowledge for a lot of people that kind of track this stuff. So I'm just gonna, smell my own farts and how much I know about this so far. Either of you find anything interesting or know anything more interesting about kind of like the history of how Final Fight came to be?
You've covered pretty much the whole thing on what the basic knowledge is. Perhaps some of the biggest knowledge or biggest interest in what may be different, I think, is how some of the home ports handled their translation and some degree of censorship as far as what came to, especially with my experience of Super Nintendo. Yeah, this was kind of one of the things that set the standard. As you said, it's not the first beat 'em up. That was Double Dragon, at least the first recognized, but there was that even earlier one that comes from the same family as River City Ransom, whose name I can never remember off the top of my head. Renegade, thank you. But this kind of pun unintended sort of kicked in the door for the brawler genre to have a very bright period in the early 90s until it was usurped by the 1v1 fighting genre.
I would even say the beat 'em up kind of carried on a little bit longer. I mean, yes, you're right that the fighting genre definitely did take over for it. But I mean, you had beat 'em ups that were well regarded well into the PlayStation Saturn era. They went on for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. And a number of them, strangely, are Capcom titles.
Yeah. Dungeons and Dragons, the beat 'em ups there, some of the best ever made. People consider. I don't think anything will ever beat Streets of Rage, but you know what? There are plenty of good ones.
There are plenty of good ones. And of course, I always like to shout out another Capcom classic that, for some reason, which I'm assuming is licensing based, it never got a home port, was Alien vs. Predator.
It needs it. It's way overdue. I don't understand it. That's such a... People love that game.
I think
really
now
good.
That both franchises are under Fox, which is under Disney, they could get the license going, but I could be here for an hour talking about that. That's a whole other problem.
Right. Shane, anything you want to say about the history, or let's get right into our personal experiences?
Yeah, I mean, there's really not too much that I don't think we already covered, or that I think people generally know, right? Like, you could throw in the little bits of trivia about like Poison and Roxy, and like the obvious like influences, or like Andor being like Andre the Giant, stuff like that. But I think those are fairly common knowledge. I will say the one thing that I wasn't aware of is, and maybe you guys are, I don't know, that apparently there's an ultimate sacrifice ending. Were you guys aware of this?
No.
So apparently, apparently there's an ending where you can still rescue your damsel in distress, even on your last hit, by apparently timing your death to like your death animation to like land on her, which is odd. I did not know that was a thing.
Huh. Yeah, I had no idea. Never heard of it.
No. But other than that, I think that's pretty much it.
All right. With that little bit of trivia and nugget of knowledge, we'll go right into our own personal experiences. I'll kick this one off and saying did not play it when it was in the arcades. I didn't play it when it came to the Super Nintendo. I don't think I played it until maybe I don't even know. It had to be at most 15 years ago, at least 10 years ago. I think the first time I played it was actually for the Sega CD through emulation, because I heard that was the best way to play it, and I don't got time to fuck with MAME. I may have played on one of those Capcom collection editions that Capcom had released. I have it for the PSP. I just don't know which one I played first. But I have played Final Fight, and I remember the first time I played it, I was like, oh, this is where Streets of Rage got all of the character sprites from. Because Streets of Rage and as a byproduct, Streets of Rage 2 definitely stole a lot from this game. There's no denying that.
Absolutely, they did.
Oh yeah, just straight up uplifted it and moved it in there. But aside from that, my personal history is just kind of playing it well after the fact it came out. Never really got into it on any sort of scale. I recognize the history that it has. That's mostly me, just kind of a casual observer hearing more about it than actually participating in it. I think, Phil, you have probably the best story. You can close out the personal experiences. So Shane, you can go next.
Oh, good. Because I don't really have much either. So that's exciting. Yeah, I mean, I was struggling to remember if I had even really truly played this game until we were gearing up to talk about it. I don't think I have, because I really don't remember any of it at all. So I don't think I've played it. Like I'm aware of it through like social osmosis, but I'm not sure I ever put like hand to arcade stick at any point to play this game. So I think this was a fresh run for me. So I really I have like zero history with it. So there you go. Super enthralling. And Phil is going to be here to save this segment.
Well, from you. Anyway, Phil, please let us know your personal experiences with Final Fight.
Okay, my personal experience with Final Fight. As you guys said in the brief history, it did come out around 1989, right, 1990, right at the cusp. I was around about 12 years old at that age, so I began seeing this in arcades. It caught my attention over a lot of other arcade games. This was still the day when, things like Arkanoid and Centipede and stuff like that were still kind of dominating the landscape. You would have like some early blips like Mad Dog McCree that would come up on like, holograms sort of thing. But this one at the time, to me, to my 12-year-old, still very new to the world eyes, saw this and looked at one of the best drawn, the best sprite animated, the best playing arcade games I had seen up to that point. Now, mind you, this is before Street Fighter II or Marvel vs. Capcom or anything like that. However, I fell in love with the game. I played it everywhere I could. My favorite character was Cody. I enjoyed playing Haggar. I thought Guy was a little weak. When I say foundational games, as far as my library and my history of gaming, there's at least one game for every one of my favorite genres that was the start. That was the thing that got me involved. If it's JRPGs, that would be Final Fantasy IV. If it are CRPGs, that would be the first Baldur's Gate. If it were fighting games, surprisingly, that would be Samurai Showdown. And for the beat-em-up brawler genre, it is Final Fight, from which I became increasingly ravenous for anything else in the beat-em-up genre. But the thing that I remember the most about this particular title was one time we were on vacation somewhere. The hotel we were staying at actually had like a, sort of arcade room for kids, because it was a family place. And they had an arcade cabinet of Final Fight. And one day, my dad went down with me. He was just kind of like, give me like $5 and like, here, just spend some quarters and, we'll get the fresh air. You go play an arcade game for a while. And then he started watching me play it, and he plunked some quarters in. And I figured, we'll play a little bit, and he'll say like $1, and we'll be done. We'll leave. Well, for reasons that will now remain forever unknown to me, he decided to keep dumping money into it because he got really into the game. And the two of us played through the whole thing. He was Haggar the entire time. I was Cody the entire time. And every time we died, he'd throw in more quarters. And we just kept going until we finally beat it. And it was one of those rare times because my dad didn't play games much. He played a little bit of Tetris. He had an Atari 2600 that he gave me that he played a couple games on. But for some reason, that memory sticks with me of just the day my dad and I played through Final Fight on his dime out of nowhere and had a little bit of a bonding experience because he and I were very different people. His idea of fun and mine were quite a bit different. So it was just something that stuck with me, a memory of me and him playing through Final Fight. And I think that cemented it for me.
Thank you for sharing that. That's awesome.
Well,
I think
shit.
a lot of people...
Now I can't say anything bad about the game. Damn it.
Well, yes, I mean, you should.
You can, yeah, no, it's fine. We're adults. You can do that.
But I think that's an experience a lot of people who play games can probably relate to, or hope they can relate to, is when you have a parent or a parental figure who normally wouldn't take the time out of their day to play a video game with you, to play that video game with you, to express that interest in your hobby, and to see them get enjoyment out of that. I think that's an experience that, that can't be replaced. It's an amazing feeling. And so thank you for sharing that. That's a great story. I will say that something I forgot to mention, though, is the first time I had ever heard of Final Fight, and this might be interesting, was because of the Street Fighter Alpha series. Because I like, people kept on saying, if you haven't played Street Fighter Alpha, well, Alpha 1 through 3, this is where you get Guy is in there, Sodom, Rolento, Cody comes up in Street Fighter Alpha 3, and there's a couple other characters, but they're in the other Street Fighter games. And like, in the Street Fighter Alpha series, I mained Guy for a little bit. I didn't know he was from the Final Fight series until, like, I think there was an ending with one of the characters that had like Haggar in it. I'm like, what is he doing here? And that's when I learned about Final Fight. A little embarrassing. But let's get into the story of Final Fight. There is quite a story. As I have been doing when there is a story in the instruction manual, I will read it. For this one, I'm reading from the Sega CD manual, because fuck the Super Nintendo one. That's why. So here's the story before we discuss. It is, this page starts out with, "Welcome to Metro City, crime capital of the world. A fact that Mike Haggar, the city's newly elected mayor, plans to change. From his experience as a professional wrestler and street fighter, Haggar knows how criminal system operates. How the criminal system operates. My bad grammar, not this one. And he knows exactly how to beat the gangs at their own game. As a professional wrestler? Okay. News of Haggar's election has caused alarm among the gangs, especially Mad Gear, the largest criminal organization in the city. The leader of Mad Gear decided to use an old proven formula to get the mayor to cooperate, by appealing to him through the one thing he loves the most. Mike's daughter Jessica is being held hostage by the members of Mad Gear. Haggar wants his daughter back, but he won't give in to the gang's demands. The only thing left to do is to go after her himself and meet the gang on its own turf. Fortunately, Mike isn't alone. Upon hearing the news of Jessica's kidnapping, two young vigilantes, Jessica's boyfriend Cody and a martial arts expert named Guy, have decided to join the search. Here's where you come in. As Haggar, Cody, or Guy, you venture into the most dangerous venues in the city, from filthy slums to expensive high-rises, where the only laws are made by the... Oh god, okay, this is a typo. Where the only laws are made by the fighters who are still standing. You'll face Mad Gear's best and nastiest thugs, professional wrestlers, that's your mayor, martial arts experts, and psychopaths armed with guns, firebombs, and grenades. Use your bare hands and feet, grab a blade or a pipe, and make sure you have your brains in gear before they wind up dashed on the concrete. All right, so there's your story.
Dang.
So Shane, you didn't have much to talk about there in your personal history. What do you think of the story here with Final Fight?
I mean, yep. I'm not sure what there is to say. Like, it's your standard, like, hey, the streets, they rage, and only you can quell the anger with your fist. Like, sure, like, yes, this is an excuse to beat up like 10,000 dudes, and I'm here for it. So there you go.
Do you love beating off 10,000 dudes?
I mean, I can't do it in 24 hours, but I haven't hit that record yet, but
you only have 30 minutes.
Oh man. Like I don't even, how do you How do you go faster than the speed of light?
Well, I mean, with the turbo button, apparently.
Oh, okay. I just feel like that would just disintegrate. Just disintegrating dicks. Okay, well, this has gone completely off the rails, so.
Well, I mean, if you want the ambiance and the experience, there is that one stage where there's nothing but busted up public men's rooms, so.
That is true.
Yeah, the ones that just have nothing but sexy written on them like 12 times.
Yep.
Yes. That's what you write in the men's stall is sexy.
Definitely. Who?
Yes.
Doesn't matter.
No, sexy all over it. What do you think, Phil?
Oh, this is absolutely god-awful 80s cheese of Japan looking at the United States going, movies tell the truth. It is the Mad Gear versus the Fightin' Mayor. It is Hell in a Cell across 6 of the worst parts of the city. It's obviously a rip on New York. I mean, literally one stage has the fucking Statue of Liberty in the background. Let's be honest. This is oversimplification, interpretation. It is the opportunity to just go, we're going to eat every kid in the arcade's change and let them beat the fuck out of these sprites.
Yes. I don't really know how much more we can elaborate on this. From what I understand, it was kind of loosely based off the movie Streets of Fire, which was a 1982 or 1983 movie, which has an awesome trailer, by the way. Mm-hmm. If you haven't checked it out, you should go check it out. And it stars Rick Moranis and Willem Dafoe. So there is that.
Those are two actors I would not have expected in that kind of a movie.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if there isn't a little bit of the Warriors influence as well.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it really ultimately stems out of Double Dragon, right? That was kind of the fever. If you look at all the beat-em-ups that weren't involving delinquent Japanese high school students, it was this. It was either, the people playing hooky from school, or they're in New York just infested with crime. It was the America that the Japanese wanted New York to be, or whatever. However that saying goes. Yeah, that's pretty much it. There's not much of a plot here. I mean, Jessica's Cody's girlfriend, which wasn't... Oh, it is in here. Jessica's boyfriend is Cody. I want to just call Guy Guy, too, because I think that would be funny. I wish his name was Guy, because then he would... I mean, he's close. He's kind of close to Canada. If you look at his picture, he could be French. Mm-hmm. So he's now Guy. Guy Lafleur. He's a hockey player. That's why he's so good with pipes. And they're kind of like hockey sticks.
I was like, where are you going with that? I don't even understand the correlation there. I mean, the nets are made of pipe? Was that like...
Yes, you do. Yes.
I mean, if anything, they look more like field hockey sticks, if we're being real, but it's fine. It's fine.
Still, I mean, that's why he's French and not Canadian.
Oh, okay. Sure.
I don't even know how that makes sense. Oh, boy. Anyway, let's move on past the story, because there's not much there. And just go into what the meat is here. A lot of meat. Before I awkwardly get shunned here. We'll start with you here, Phil. How about you kick us off in the gameplay?
Final Fight is kind of as far as a beat 'em up, about as simple as it gets. It's really a arcade stick 2-button basher. You have your punch button, you have your jump button. You press both together, you get a super attack. You walk up to the enemy, sprites contact, it's considered a grapple. You can do one of two things. You can either throw them, or you can hold them and repeatedly punch or kick them. If you're Haggar, you're strong enough to be able to pick the entire guy up, no matter how big they are, and pile drive them into the earth. The other two guys, Guy Lefleur and Cody, just simply don't have that strength, so they just hold them in close and beat the hell out of them or toss them. It is about as bargain basement as you can get. There's not really combos you can do. There's not really any kind of exalted sort of attack forms that you can come up with that later Capcom games would do, or Konami games would do, or Streets of Rage would later do. But it's a great foundation as far as simplicity. You get in there, you punch, you feel good, you bust a barrel, there's some barbecue, off you go.
Yeah, pretty much the long and the short of it. I mean, to kind of go back to the foundations here with Double Dragon, I think the best way to kind of articulate Double Dragon for most people is going to be the Nintendo version, or Double Dragon 2. I think that's the one. I mean, that's one I started out with, and that seems to be the one that people most fondly remember. And the control scheme for Double Dragon 2 was way different. I think the arcade kind of had a similar feel, where the buttons weren't jump and attack. The buttons were attack in the direction that you wanted to attack in. So you had a left button and a right button. If you wanted to attack to the right, you press that, and corresponding to the left. And if you wanted to jump, you pressed both buttons, and then situational timing made it so the pressing both buttons would result in a special attack. And that was Double Dragon. I think what you have here with Final Fight that was really foundational, and I wouldn't say too foundational, because Golden Axe was doing it. And they came out, I think Golden Axe came out in 1989 as well. I know this was a couple months ago. I don't have it off the top of my head, but this was, same year, same concept. And there's a lot of similarities there that you could probably argue that in many ways Golden Axe was more... Golden Axe actually probably set a lot more of the rules. It's just Final Fight feels better. It really feels a lot better. The punches, the quickness you can do it with, like the enemy balance, the not getting into a grapple loop with the enemies, which is not something you could do really effectively with Golden Axe. Really kind of changed the way that I think developers started approaching what beat 'em ups could be. And you see this evolution from Double Dragon or Renegade, whichever one you want to take, up until Final Fight. And Final Fight really is that watershed moment for beat 'em ups. Golden Axe almost had it. They almost had the formula down 100%. But I think what it really comes down to is that the AI is sharper here. The physicality, the gratification of how a punch lands in Final Fight just kind of changes the paradigm, because that was happening with the Double Dragon series. Like, the punches felt good, but the control wasn't there. In Golden Axe, like, it doesn't feel as good, but the control is relatively there. You're seeing comparison there. You don't have the special attacks in Final Fight. I mean, you do, but it's not like in Golden Axe. And the special attacks in Double Dragon, they're more secret moves, so they don't drain your health. But they do drain your health in Final Fight, and they're more to avoid having the enemies surround you. And crowd control is becoming a very important aspect in the beat 'em up genre here, especially with as many enemies that are on the screen. And I'll talk more when I get into kind of the difficulty of it all, and where I start thinking where that bottom of the barrel basic control that you're talking about, Phil, actually starts to become a detriment to it. But overall, like, if you're talking about when this game came out in 1989 compared to everything else, like, this is just it's buttery smooth, and it's somewhat of a revelation. I mean, in games in general, and just how they're performing. I'd have to go back and take a bigger picture of that, but based off some beat 'em ups I played from that era, yeah, this is a huge leap forward. Shane, what do you think?
I need to temper my thoughts based on the time that this came out. I'll say that first.
Fair.
Because you said buttery smooth, and I was like, because it is mostly. So my take on this is that this was a game that got so close to being, I'm not going to say perfect, but so close to being something that I genuinely would want to replay, much like I do Turtles in Time or something like that. It was like, it's like right there. It's like a toe on the finish line. But there's just these like small things that kind of ruin it. Not completely ruin, but just kind of throws it off for me. So one of the things that I noticed is there's a bit of a lack of responsiveness in the button presses that is like painfully apparent. And it's this specific like scenario, which seems like odd that I'd be pointing out like one thing, but it happens a lot, or at least for me, it did. And that is, I'm fighting either, it doesn't matter, 1 or 6 guys. It's kind of irrelevant, because if there's 6 dudes all lined up, you're basically punching all of them anyway. But you're fighting in one direction, right? And then you start seeing dudes coming in from the other direction. And so what I instinctually want to do is finish the little punch combo I'm doing with a nice uppercut and knock all those dudes on their ass, and then quickly turn and then do a jump kick to like push off the guys that are coming from the other direction so that I can continue dealing with the ones in the front. That doesn't always work because there are times where my button inputs were just not read, like just straight up not read. Like I will do the punch combo, and then when I go to press the button to jump and do a jump kick, I press the button and it just refuses to do it. And so that feels bad. So that actually caused a number of times where I would just get the shit beat out of me because of that like momentary hesitation that was a result of that button input not being read properly. So that's not great. I wish that was tightened up a little bit more, because if it had that extra bit of responsiveness right there, man, that small thing would have made such a huge difference for me. And like I said, I don't know if that experience is universal. Maybe it's just me. Maybe it's the fact that I was playing the version that's on the Capcom collection thingy on Steam. Maybe it was a port issue of some kind. I don't know. But that sucked, frankly, because I got to the end of the game and I was just like, I really enjoyed this. Like, I liked the gameplay. I think the only other thing I really wish is you could move a bit faster, because it feels a little clunky sometimes because you feel like you're moving really slow. Other than that, it's like I said, it's like right there. It's like so close to being like just 100% super smooth with all of the control inputs, but it's that one thing with like missed button inputs that's just like it's aggravating because like I want it to be right there.
Any follow up on that, Phil?
Yeah, I'm gonna, like I said, add a couple things on to what you guys said. You're right. It did come out the same year as Golden Axe, and even in 1989, you can do a side-by-side comparison. I kind of did, because I did also play like Golden Axe in the arcade. By comparison, even to Final Fight at the time, Golden Axe feels incredibly slow. It feels very sluggish.
Yes.
Somehow, I'm I don't know the technicality behind it. Maybe it's the board, maybe it's the programming. It feels like you should just be moving a little faster than snail pace, which is something I don't think even Golden Axe corrected until Golden Axe: The Revenge of Death Adder.
Yeah.
Which actually began to feel like a smoother game. Now, Final Fight, as you said, and I'll agree with you, it is buttery smooth for the time. In looking at it now, I can see, as someone who is an artist and knows a bit about animation and stuff like that, I can see where the frames feel a little herky-jerky now with my knowledge. A couple of years after this, Capcom, I believe, would release another beat-em-up called Captain Commando with one of their own franchises. And the graphics on that, just adding a few additional frames of animation between the punches, kicks, the movement, bring up the speed a little bit, made that even smoother and a bit more responsive. And they would go on to evolve this, probably because of Street Fighter II Turbo, but they would go on to evolve this both with their fighting games and with their beat-em-ups. Like I said, in comparison, as you mentioned, Chronicles of Mystara, Alien vs. Predator, Marvel vs. Capcom, Marvel vs. Capcom 2, those games are like lightning by comparison. But in 1989, it was probably one of the best things when your other options are, like you said, Renegade, Crime Fighters, Golden Axe, a bunch of them. Even Double Dragon, for what it was, still seems a little bit slow.
You're right, yeah.
But, I can't find fault with what you're saying. And port issues, I think you're right. I think there was some kind of port issue with the Capcom collection on Steam. I don't know with the current one, because they also released a game recently with the Marvel vs. Capcom 1 and 2 bundle that they did. They kind of snuck in The Punisher as well, which is another forgotten Capcom title. I haven't heard anything bad about that, but even looking at that, I mean, that looks a little jerky by comparison, so I'm kind of worried there may be a minor port issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right on all aspects there. I think the speed of which Final Fight up the game is definitely one of the more notable contributions. It's like that's what really set the standard, because I mean, Golden Axe had a lot of the same things that Final Fight has, but Final Fight had the speed. It had the amount of people on screen at the same time, which is a big deal. And by the way, Double Dragon in the arcades, don't play it. If you want your opinion about Double Dragon, if you like it, to stay intact, because actually the console ports, the NES ports are, in my opinion, way better than the arcade. But one thing that I think about when it comes to Final Fight in particular, when describing the gameplay, is that what's notable is that arcade difficulty. I didn't notice the jank either, or the missing frames or anything like that. But what I will say is that AI is brutal.
Mm-hmm.
And I even, like, there's a difficulty slider option. I played this one for this episode in particular at the lowest difficulty level on the Capcom Beat 'em Up bundle. It's like, if you go to pick up a weapon, which weapons are fine in this game, I think they work. There's some games where I think weapons are almost useless. Streets of Rage 2. Even though I love Streets of Rage 2, I don't like using weapons in that game. I think using combos are far more effective. And to a lesser extent, that's kind of the case here. I think that's the case in most beat 'em ups. But if you're trying to fight an enemy, they know exactly what the standoff distance is, especially those knife-throwing bastards. They'll just stand there and kind of stare at you. You move into them. Sometimes, they move away from you with enough distance that you're not going to catch up to them. And then you'll bend over to pick up a weapon. And then they'll like, okay, opportunity, and move in and immediately attack you. It's like, especially with the knife throwing bastards, because they leave their knives all over the place. Sometimes you have to actively avoid picking up those weapons, which can be infuriating.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you have a turbo function, it's not as bad with a lot of enemies. You can get away from it. But I just find that at the end of the day for Final Fight, what really defines this difficulty, and maybe like a high level player, and perhaps yourself, Phil, because you're probably much better at this game than I am. But what I found is that kind of the difficulty and gameplay mechanics for Final Fight is just throwing enemies at you from all directions. And if you don't have a second player, that's just how it defines itself, is we are going to swarm you, figure it out. And even then, you'll get punished if you make one wrong move. And sometimes you can just get into an infinite death loop, because you can get knocked down, especially with Andore. You get knocked down, he jumps on you, and like 3/4 of your health bar is gone.
Yep, it definitely happened to me.
I'm not the biggest fan of that approach to gameplay design.
I will say this. The game does kind of assume that there's going to be a second player there to kind of watch your back the entire time. Considering I played this both single player and with a partner, it goes smoother when you have a friend. There is one enemy type in the game and 2 boss fights that I absolutely loathe.
Mm-hmm.
The knife guys I can deal with. It's their cousins who throw the Molotov cocktails.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, because they will set the entire screen on fire, and there's nowhere you can go. Once everything is on fire, you're fucked. Even jumping through will probably land you in more fire, and it's again can cause a death loop. Now the 2 fights I cannot stand, I loathe, are both bosses. They're late game bosses. The Rolento fight on the elevator, because he's got teleportation bullshit, and you can't land a good hit. And the one right after him, Abigail, basically the father of all Andores. You can start beating the hell out of him, but once he backs up into that choke slam charge, if you don't get him perfectly, you're knocked down and a chunk of your health flies off.
Abigail's horrific. I hated that fight. Abigail has a longer reach than you too.
Way worse than the final boss. Yeah.
Far worse.
Way worse than the final boss.
Abigail has a further reach than you. So if you try to go in for the close, by the way, my main is Guy. I'm sorry. My main is Guy. So I try to close in with Guy, and I get smacked around because the attack length for Abigail is longer. I try to do a jump kick, and if you miss the jump kick, you will get picked up and thrown across the screen without fail. Sometimes you can get your combo interrupted and thrown across the screen without fail. So you kind of have to wait for Abigail to charge at you, almost hit Abigail like Bald Bull in Punch-Out! If you want to successfully attack them. So it's a fight that sucks. Oh, at the same time, you're going to get 2 to 3 enemies that are coming up and trying to beat you up at the same while you're trying to take care of Abigail. Which just I hate that fight. It's bullshit.
Yeah. I mean, for anyone who hasn't played Final Fight before, to deal with that, the only way I found effectively is just switch over to Haggar and literally use the 2.5D screen to your advantage. As Abigail is coming, like literally track off and like meet him at a 45-degree angle so that Haggar automatically locks in the grapple and then leap into the air and body slam him.
Yeah.
Because if you play, like I said, I've done it myself. God love you. You're going to get the shit kicked out of you. Even with Cody, if you miss on that initial throw of the punch to like throw him off balance, he will absolutely slap the hell out of you.
Yep.
Yeah, and if we're talking about really awesome boss encounters, how about the guy with a fucking gun?
Oh yeah, the cop.
I was just like, yeah. Yep. I was just like, oh man, this fisticuffs brawling sure is great. And then I get to this guy and I'm like, all right, well, this will probably be pretty similar to the rest of them. And then he pulls just like a fucking Indiana Jones on me and just stands there and pulls out a pistol. And I'm like, that doesn't seem fair.
He loves your
thing,
quarters.
Of course. Yep. First thing he does is spits his gum on the ground, which you can immediately grab and stuff in your mouth for health.
Yep.
I was wondering what that was.
Yep, that was his gum.
Okay, great.
Yeah, boss battles they're pretty bad. Damned is fine. I think Damned is fine. I actually I don't mind Relento. I think that Sodom can be annoying.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have the pattern down, but if you pick up one of his katanas and you just like stand in a corner and you keep hitting it over and over and over again, you can get him into a death loop without problem.
Oh, Sodom's a piece of piss. Once you get that second katana out of his hand, he stands around like a limp dick. He literally doesn't know what to do with himself, and you can just keep hitting him over and over again.
Yeah, because all he does is charge at you. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
You just
it's his
whack
whole
him
thing.
around.
And Damned literally like it's trying out for Cirque du Soleil the entire time.
Yeah. By the way, I think I've heard on, I think it was Retronauts, they called Geese Howard the original weeb. No, that's Sodom. Sodom is the OG weeb. Do you know his history, Shane?
Evidently no, I don't.
Okay. And the only reason I learned this is once again through Street Fighter Alpha. Because Sodom is an American that dresses up in the samurai armor and thinks he's Japanese. He is the ultimate weeb. Yes.
Yeah. Also known as Katana, if you happen to play the Super Nintendo version.
Yes. We don't refer to him as that. It's a dumb name.
Okay, which one was the one?
Cultural appropriation.
Right. Yeah. Which one was the one you might have already mentioned it? I don't remember all the names, but the dude that just like constantly jumps around like chucking grenades.
Relento.
Oh.
Okay. Yeah, I hated that dude.
He's also in Street Fighter Alpha.
Yeah.
I love playing as him too.
That sucked.
I love him as a character in the fighting games. I do not like fighting against him. I don't think I thought he was as bad as Phil did. But yeah, he is a pain. Boss fights are a pain. The difficulty is just off the charts. And that's what kind of kills the joy modernly with Final Fight, because when you compare it to the games that came immediately after, more so on consoles than the arcade, because the arcade is always begging for those quarters.
Mm-hmm.
But the like console versions, and I always go to Streets of Rage because I am a Streets of Rage fanboy. But when you look at how Sega, I think they perfected the beat 'em up in terms of balance. Because anyone coming to Streets of Rage as a newbie is going to have difficulty, but they're still going to feel powerful. You can, like, the first level of Final Fight, you get to the end of the first level, you face Damned, and you're going to get wrecked on your first couple playthroughs. Like, no question. The difficulty curve in Final Fight is way higher. And even if you are an experienced beat-em-up fan, it's unforgiving in instances. I don't think you find that with what happened with like the Streets of Rage series. You certainly don't see that difficulty in Final Fight 2 or Final Fight 3. Now, no one talks about those games. I don't know. I mean, I've tried playing them. They try to do some interesting things. They're not as... Final Fight 2 might be better, but it's been a long time since I've played it, so I don't want to go out on a limb and say that. But Capcom certainly learned a lot moving forward, as what Phil was saying, because they did move forward, like Captain Commando, Alien vs. Predator, Chronicles of Mystara. This was definitely the foundation, but they learned that balance, and it makes me wonder if, like, they did kind of look to Sega, who did rip off Final Fight in almost every aspect. I have to wonder if that's because of the console limitations of Streets of Rage that kind of forced Capcom to balance things out in the future. I know it's kind of a different question, but I mean, what the hell? Why not answer that question in our own way here?
No, I could see that and agree with you. I mean, it's very obvious that Capcom learned a hell of a lot from Final Fight and quickly moving into Street Fighter 2.
Yeah.
Well, I will say this, is that they sure as fuck did not look to Konami. Because Konami loved Castlevania, loved Metal Gear Solid, a lot of the classics, maybe not Silent Hill 2, but the reality is their beat-em-up games really don't get smooth and good until, like, Turtles in Time.
Yeah, for the Super Nintendo.
Yeah, the original Turtles beat 'em up, the first beat 'em up that came out probably about 1990, almost like on Final Fight's tail, is kind of clunky.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I think they were the ones responsible also for the Simpsons arcade game.
Yes.
And that one is weird. It makes a lot of the same mistakes Final Fight does, drain health or whatnot. They try to play it a bit smoother, but also they have a problem. I remember that game, loved it though I did back in the day. Hitboxes were a problem. You can get swarmed real goddamn easy. They kind of don't fix that until X-Men. And I mean X-Men, the 6-player cabinet, not the 4-player. So I could definitely see that Capcom looked at Streets of Rage and later Streets of Rage 2, which I will absolutely agree is one of the ultimate beat-em-ups of all time. I have whipped the piss out of that game. I played it till the tires fall off. But they definitely learned something for their later releases.
Oh, for sure.
Just to add in about the sort of like swarming that ends up happening a lot in this game, I actually like that. I think it keeps things interesting. I would honestly take that over, a handful or like 1 or 2 or 3 more difficult enemies at any given time. Like having swarms of enemies to fight in a beat 'em up, just to me is like, I dig that. And that just might be like the ARPG in me coming out, but like, I'm all about that, with the caveat that like I can deal with it efficiently. And that kind of circles back to that issue that I was talking about earlier, where I had this like very, what's the word? I guess very like discordant kind of reaction when these things happened. Because half of me is like, heck yeah, there's like 10 enemies on the screen right now. Let's fucking go. And then the other half of me is like, but also this is going to suck because I know that I'm not going to be able to react fast enough to deal with all of them in the way that I want to. I don't know. I'm less down on that aspect. I think like, I actually think that makes it more fun in my opinion, but I think I would love at some point to try to do this like multiplayer. It might be an excuse for beers at some point, but because I feel like having that second player, like Phil mentioned earlier, would make like a world of difference.
I have to assume it. What did you all think of the environmental hazards? Like the barrels that kept getting knocked into you, or the chandeliers that would fall down?
I think those are fine. I hated the fire, and I'm not even talking about the Molotovs. I mean that one level with all the fucking fire. It was like unavoidable.
Yeah, well, at least it hurts the enemies too.
I mean, sure. It just kind of devolved into all of us just sort of bouncing around on fire for several minutes.
Yep. Now, like I said, for the time, for me, this was like groundbreaking to see like the environment really be used against the player and against the enemies. There are plenty of games where you can bust up the entire environment. You'll get hurt. The enemies will stand there with shit-eating grins on their faces like, we're immune. It's bullshit. But, the barrels were kind of a thing where they were almost like cheap as shit, and you had to learn a strange amount of timing. if you played the game repeatedly, you kind of knew where the barrels were going to come in, and you could at least jump through the air, jump kick them, get whatever little prizes are inside. But a lot of the good environmental stuff was, for me at the time, amazing. Was it later outdone by other games? Absolutely. Its evolution occurs, but I thought it was always fun.
One last thing I want to bring up as well is that I appreciated how differently Haggar played than Cody or Guy.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Cody and Guy play relatively the same. There's not a lot of distinguishable differences. Like, I think Cody's a little bit slower than Guy and hits a little bit harder. Mm-hmm. But Haggar plays completely differently. I mean, he's much slower than either of them, but like you get into the grapple and then you're talking about that being the defining play style. Like him being a professional wrestler actually leans into the way that he plays, and I absolutely love that.
Which I think would later also go on to influence Capcom's other series. I think it was Saturday Night Slam Masters.
Yep. A little talked about, but yeah, great game. Anything on that, Shane?
Nope.
Okay. Anything else we want to add on to the gameplay here?
I think we pretty much covered it. I would talk a little bit about the final boss.
Yeah, let's get into it.
Okay. Now, as far as the time goes, the final boss of the game is fun in an odd way because I sure as hell didn't expect this coming. And it is, again, it's anime bullshit. It is just this jacked dude in a power wheelchair with a crossbow.
Automatic crossbow,
while Jessica sits on his lap, at least for a little while, till you get a couple hits in. Again, this is the 80s, so they got to have a spectacular death for this guy. No matter where you are on the screen, when your last hit lands, he flies whole bodily out of the chair with crossbow through the large plate glass window and 40 stories down to the street below. This is about, this might as well be Hans Gruber falling out of Nakatomi Plaza.
I was just going to say that.
I love it.
Everything else, even the other bosses, for good, for ill, for middle of the road, this is just the capstone to this, short on story, long on fists to the teeth, just, like I said, anime bullshit game where, the Japanese looked at this and said, this is America. Happens every Monday.
That's what we do. We go up to towers and we punch people out of them.
It's Thursday. How many guys have you thrown out of 4-story building at this point? I've got at least 10, and Christ, tomorrow's Friday. I'm hoping to cut it down to maybe 5.
I've only gotten 2. I'm behind on my quota. I'm starting to get yelled at from my boss. I need to get
See, that's the thing, because if you don't do that, he's going to have you do 400-pound rack squats.
Yeah, or I'm going to be the guy in the tower.
Yeah, get that Haggar musculature going on.
I like the fact that you can do this with the knife dudes too, that you can actually deflect all of the arrows by punching them. Mm-hmm. I appreciate
absolutely.
That. There's a lot of arrows, so like you got to press it really quick, but I do appreciate that that's a thing. More Streets of Rage references. Very similar to the Mr. X fight, because he has a machine gun. So
yeah,
Streets of Rage is just Final Fight by Sega in a lot of ways.
Gets worse in Streets of Rage 3, where he's a robot with a gun.
I don't talk about Streets of Rage 3.
I don't either. I really, if you want to measure my level of disappointment in fighting games, it is just Mount Everest. It keeps going up and up and up, and the Streets of Rage 3 gets introduced and it falls right off the fucking cliff.
Yeah. Japanese version isn't as bad, but it's still weird. Mm-hmm. Anyway, speaking of, Everest is a beautiful thing to look at, which kind of gets us into our graphical presentation. Yes, that's a forced segue. Ignore that, please. But let's talk about how this game looks in terms of its visual appearance. Shane, what do you think of these graphics? What do you think of the game's visuals?
Oh, man. So I was thinking about this one earlier today, doing that thing that I'm just assuming all other not crazy people do, which is talk to yourself while you're driving in the car.
I do it all the time.
Okay, great.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I was doing that, and I was thinking about this I'm kind of two minds about one specific thing, and that is the size of the character sprites. So traditionally, I have not been a fan of these kind of oversized sprites, and I was trying to think about why that is. And the best I could come up with is that I think part of it is because I was so used to, like the NES and most, I would argue, of the Super Nintendo catalog being, smaller character sprites, relatively speaking. And so I think, how they like show like Godzilla or like other like extremely large creatures or something like that in movies or TV shows, and they take very long, slow steps, right? Because they're just so big. Like, that's what I think of when I think of this, when I'm thinking of the comparison between these sprites and some of the smaller ones from other games, is that it could very well be that they're moving at the same pace as, another smaller sprite might, but because they're bigger, it like feels slower. Like it's a perception thing. I don't know if that sounds weird, but to me, that's the best I could like rationalize it, is that it feels like I am perceiving them to be almost sluggish in a way that they might not actually be, but it has to do with just like the relative proportions of the sprites. So that's part of it. But then the other half of me is probably more recent, because I was very much not a fan of this kind of style for a long time. But I feel like I've come around to it from just like a purely artistic point of view, in that I really do like a lot of the artistry and detail that goes into these larger, more sort of vibrant character sprites. So overall, I do really like the presentation of this game. I think the art style is great. I think the larger sprites do afford you the opportunity to have a lot more detail in just your everyday run-of-the-mill characters, whereas in other games you wouldn't quite get that until maybe you got to like a boss, and then they're just like a much larger sprite overall. But overall, yes, I dig it, but I still have that part of me that has that weird perception thing about the big sprites. They feel like gangly in a weird way to me. I don't know how else to describe it.
What do you think, Phil?
I will say I always enjoyed their attention to detail, both not on the sprites, but on the background and all the ancillary sort of characters, the enemies, the prizes you get for breaking containers and whatnot. I mean, like literally, if you look at the arcade model, you can actually see the word beer written on cans of beer. You can actually see like, a yen symbol on some of the dollar coins that you get left behind, which for the time, again, was hard to do. But also, I could see, Shane's point where you're not used to, in the beginning, these large sprites. They are a bit jarring, especially if you come in used to smaller screens. I think even the Super Nintendo version, which I had, kind of scaled them down a little bit to, I don't know, maybe save on disk space or something like that. But like I said, I think it really afforded them, Capcom, much like Square, has their love of graphics. They have their own defined style. Square loves a pretty boy, and they will get as much pretty boy lifelike as they can out of a game. Capcom loves their exaggerated cartooniness, and they will even still throw as much detail as they can at the wall, even if it leads to or works in concert with a sense of unreality, the same way you would of a cartoon show. But I think they were able to accomplish a lot at the time with the animation, with the representation of the characters, sprites, backgrounds, whatnot, on their circuit board, whatever the game was running off of in the arcades back in the day. I personally dig it. I think it's awesome. I don't think there's too many games out there that have a comparison to with the sprite size or, in some cases, level of detail short of modern gaming. But regardless of that, I think it's pretty darn cool.
I'm going to mostly agree with Phil here. I think this game still looks really good. Now, of course, this 1989 things would look better moving forward with a lot of other games, because as hardware capability increased, so did the visual fidelity. But I think if you look at it from a 1989 perspective, the overall design philosophy is solid. You have the way the characters look, the way they move is fairly good. I think the lack of frames of animation are the thing that sticks out to me the most, outside of the character details. Like, if you look at the characters moving around, it becomes very apparent when you have like poison bouncing around all over the place. It's like, oh, there's not a lot of effort to try to make these frames of animation fluid. But then again, you're talking about like 15 characters on the screen at once, which with no slowdown. And that is what is really important when you're trying to make a game execute the way it is and the way that they wanted to design it. So you can look at these sprites at the time and they looked phenomenal. Compare it to Golden Axe. This looks way, way better than Golden Axe. Visuals were also one of those things that I think informed the development of the beat 'em up genre moving forward, which what we said was the dominant genre in the arcades, aside from fighters, for a good half decade and some change. This is like the foundation of that, because if you do look at Double Dragon, those character sprites are much smaller, even in the arcade, and it's very choppy. I think 1 or 2 is like extremely choppy, and how they present themselves is really in a different format. But here, like, the backgrounds are very detailed, the character sprites are very detailed, and this is something I think, Shane, I know, Shane, you hate this, but this is something that was getting people to games. It was attracting people. Even if you go back to the TurboGrafx 16, remember, China Warrior was a game that NEC thought would attract people because of how big the sprite was. Big sprites were kind of the thing. Now, making a game with big sprites and making it work, that was really the thing. And I do think Final Fight executed that very well. So to that end, yeah, Final Fight, character designs, character sprites, they look very good. Just to shorten this up, character animations, a lot to be desired. I think acceptable, definitely acceptable for 1989, but a lot to be desired looking at it retroactively, which I guess technically is what we are doing. Other than that, I really don't have any complaints. Like, you know what you're getting into when you're getting into a game that is as old as this is. So I'll say it like 100% and give it a pass, but just, yeah, it has its relics. With that being said, I think unless anyone else has any more to chime in with the graphics, let's move in to the music. And to kind of start this off, to throw to either of you, don't care who takes over. I found out that Yoko Shimomura worked on this game, which is awesome.
Yeah, I could see his musical influence in there because, again, for the time, and we're comparing it to, let's say, like literally down the road, Streets of Rage 2, one of the greatest,
Well, you're thinking Yuzo Koshiro.
Yeah, well, I'm just like saying by comparison.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, by comparison, which, again, as far as an OST for a beat 'em up, Streets of Rage 2 is definitely something that'll get you very pumped. But Final Fight for the time, again, even listening back to it recently, it's not bad. It's honestly not bad. At least the music is varied. It's still very much in that tinny sort of 8 and 16-bit era before I think they really had kind of pressed the issue to see what kind of sound they could get out of a game board properly. A little, in some cases, I'll be honest with you, playing it a little safe. I'm not a sound guy, too. I've confessed to having a bit of a tin ear. But from what I can just sort of say about it, it's not bad by comparison.
Shane, what's your thoughts here?
Yeah, so I would agree that it definitely sounds rather very, very compressed, but I mean, no, whatever, given the time, I guess. It's not bad. I was struggling to try to think, because sometimes, when we talk about games, there's a very obvious one where I'm just like, oh, hell yeah, like I remember that stage track or whatever was fucking awesome. Nothing like immediately comes to mind, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think overall it does what it needs to do. There just really wasn't a lot that stood out to me as something that would be super, super memorable. But then again, like this isn't like a nostalgia game for me. So it's possible that there's somebody out there that's like, well, fuck you, the Metro Slums song or whatever's part of my childhood and I hate you. Okay, fine. But yeah, no, it's pretty good.
Yeah, I'm just going to kind of second everything that all of you said. I think like the music's fine. It's fine. And like you look at the people who composed for this, like I already said, Yoko Shimomura. She's probably the most successful out of any of the composers here. There's 7 composers that are listed and credited here. And the other ones that are of note, or at least have a Wikipedia page, you have Manami Matsumai, I think that's how you say it, Manami Matsumai, who did the music for Mega Man, the original Mega Man, and some other ones. There's quite a list for them there. You have Yasuaki Fujita, who did the music for Mega Man 3. Mega Man did the sounds for Mega Man 4, and a lot of other things. Darkwing Duck did the music for that, and a list of other stuff. And then the last one that's of note is Harumi Fujita, who did the music for Strider. Also worked on Mega Man 3 in addition to some other music up till today. I mean, you have a really good group of composers. Guess what? This is not one that sticks out among their work. I believe. I think the music is fine. I don't think it's fantastic. It doesn't really... It's not an OST that I've heard a lot about. In fact, like the OST you hear about when it comes to Final Fight is the Sega CD version. That is the definitive OST for Final Fight. I think the reputation is that's better than the arcade. So take that for what it is worth. When it comes to the sound effects themselves, they are okay. I do think they sound very visceral. I think punches land and they sound fantastic. I think it really sounds, when you compare it to the other beat 'em ups, and again, like this is the kind of the perspective, and I know I've been doing this a lot. When you compare it to that Golden Axe, when you compare it to that Double Dragon, the way that punches sound when they land sounds like impact. It gives the feel. It makes it feel good to punch other people in Final Fight. That goes to the sound design. I think that is one of the most important parts of what Final Fight does correctly. Everything else is mostly standard fare. So the one thing that stands out is probably very important is how Impact sounds and how it makes Impact feel. But aside from that, it's good. I don't want to take anything away from it, but it's not like a standout legendary type of thing.
Yeah, and I will also add, as you were talking, I was doing some very quick comparative listening here, and holy shit, you are 100% correct. The Sega CD version is miles better than the arcade. Oh my god. Like, it's not even a contest.
No. Yeah, the Sega CD is an amazing soundtrack. It's so good. Especially
that's way better. Jeez. Yeah. Okay, I just wanted to add that. I was not aware of the like stark difference, but there really is one.
Have you ever listened to the Sega CD soundtrack, Phil?
No, I guess I'm going to have to. I have heard rumor that it was the better one, but tangentially, I will add, even to this day, speaking of sound, I always get a giggle out of the stage where, as a bonus round, you smash a car.
Oh,
which at least does sound like pretty metallic. And the poor guy comes around and goes, "Oh my god!"
Yeah.
And it's like, again, Jill sandwich levels of like bad line read.
Yeah, that was really good. I forgot about that.
You know what? I actually think the American version of that makes more sense and sounds better because, of course, I don't know if it's because of Nintendo or whatever, but in the American version, he says, "Oh my car." And it actually sounds better.
Yeah, I mean, the Super Nintendo one, instead of saying, "Oh my god," he says, "Oh my car."
I like how it's like essentially the same same bonus stage as Street Fighter 2 as well. Like, exact same one. I love it.
With, your main character you're playing is on the other side of this ruined, smoking hulk of a vehicle, standing there in their fight pose, and this poor sucker comes along, and he's just sitting there. You see the big tears running down the ground. It's like, oh, cow.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
Great sound bit. Great sound bit. You better put that in there, Ashton. Whichever one you want to. Oh, my God, or oh, my car. Or both. I don't care. Better be there. Anyway, so we've talked about this game. I think we've talked about it enough, and we're going to tell you whether or not we think this game holds up today. But before we do, we are going to get into our patrons' pontifications, and if you want to share your pontifications, you can do so. All you have to do is sign up for our Patreon. That sounds a little patronizing, I guess, but just go to our Patreon for as little as $1. You can join our Patreon and give your thoughts for upcoming episodes. We post that information on our Patreon and in our Discord, which is free to join. Anyone can join Discord. However, I've been talking too much about this Patreon thing. So let's get into the pontifications here, starting with the Emperor, who says, great beat 'em up that you can plow through in like 30 minutes. The Sega CD version is the best version I've played so far. Someone out there is porting this to the Sega Genesis also. Interesting. I think I did see something about that. All right. Well, thank you, Emperor.
All right. Next on the list, we have Nomad of the Retro Wildlands podcast, who says, Final Fight, for me, is like a pizza without any toppings. It's fine. Maybe a little good, even, if toppingless pizza is your jam. Actual gameplay can get kind of samey pretty quick, and by the time the game is almost over, you've pretty much seen what the game has to offer. It's a perfect place for a new player to the genre to start off. From basic attacks, jump kicks, weapons, and random food items, all the basics are here, and Final Fight executes on them just fine. If you never play it, you're not really going to miss anything, but if you do decide to give this one a go, you won't feel like you wasted your time either. Thank you, Nomad. That was a very, Futurama, tell my wife I said hello, middle of the road pontification.
All right, next up we have a pontification from Masked Keaton, who says, Mayor Haggar is iconic! Thank you, Masked Keaton. I agree, he is extremely iconic.
Yes. Love the emotion there.
There's double exclamation points. You can't help but have a little bit of emotion.
Good point.
True.
Good point, yes. All right, next is Sega Boy 7. Final Fight is a very important game to the beat-em-up genre, as it would set the template for how beat-em-ups should play. Well, being a good game for '89, it would be easily surpassed by better games in the genre like Streets of Rage 2 and Turtles in Time. Play this game on the arcade or the Sega CD. Stay away from that god-awful SNES port. Sega does what Nintendo don't. Thank you, Sega Boy.
All right, and next we have Raging Demon, the Command List with a K podcast, who writes, while it was a solid beat-em-up for its time, SOR very much said, hold my beer, and then proceeded to rip it off, but do it so much better. Final Fight is definitely dear to people, and nostalgia is high, but I think ultimately this series' greatest contribution to gaming is to top up the Street Fighter roster and lore when Capcom teams of the last 2 decades have been left with the task of creating new Street Fighter characters. They have consistently given us Alex and Sean and Kimberly. So thanks, Final Fight, for reducing the number of characters that Capcom had to create from scratch for Street Fighter. Let's hope one day you get a new game as a thank you. Would love a Streets of Rage 4 style sequel for Final Fight, and it would be super ironic too. Thank you, Demon.
I would actually like that.
I would actually agree with that. I would be good with that.
Yeah.
All right, next we have Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon, from both the Fun and Games and Reignite podcast. Matt says, a beat-em-up classic. Not even close to one of my top choices in the genre, but solid enough. I understand. Mayor Haggar rules, though. Haggar for president. We can't do worse.
I would vote for Haggar. All right, next is Ray Ray. And Ray Ray says, Final Fight took beat-em-ups to the next level. For 1989, it was ahead of its time. Besides, where else can you find a mayor that looks like Dan Severn? And where can you find a perfectly cooked curry dish under some random drum can? Thank you, Ray Ray, and you make some fantastic points.
I don't know, Toronto maybe? Anyway.
Possibly.
Lucas from the Game Over Hell YouTube channel says, my memories of the game are kinda hazy, but what I do remember is liking the look and sound effects when I was a kid. Capcom has always been good at those. I also remember playing the game with family, relatives, and friends, and everyone always losing interest in making it past the third level or so. Wait, no. That was the second one, wasn't it? I don't know. Either way, not a bad series of games, but I just prefer Knights of the Round, King of Dragons, Mighty Final Fight, TMNT4, and Streets of Rage a lot more. I never did much research on belt scrollers, so whatever you talk about will be a history lesson for me. Thank you, Lucas.
Good
Knights
call.
of the Round. That's another good one to talk about.
It is. Mighty Final Fight is a good cut too, because it is. I think in many ways it is better than the original, and it's an NES demake essentially. So, good cut, good take.
Alt says, turns out it wasn't the final fight. You're right, Alt. It wasn't. There were too many final fights.
Hey, Ashton, please insert a rim shot sound effect after that. Thank you.
Yes. I hope we never have to talk about Final Fight Revenge.
Ugh.
Or Streetwise. Anyway, Keith from the Main Quest podcast says, Final Fight was the first brawler I really fell in love with. I've always loved the grimy street punk representation of the larger cities in the US during the late 80s and early 90s, and Metro City is a perfect recreation of those vibes. Combos are easy to pull off, and the large, chunky sprites look fantastic, and even though I don't think the OST is that great, I'll never get the sound of large, beefy men screaming as they pile drive each other into the concrete out of my head. The SNES port, not so great. The lack of co-op really hurt it, but it was never an issue to pass the controller back and forth between friends. Also, bonus points for this game being one of the earliest games to have a trans character. Not out of sensitivity or wanting representation, but because somehow it made it okay to beat up a woman if she also had a massive cock. Progressive and problematic, but I guess that's for a different podcast. Thank you, Keith.
Oh, I'd love to talk about progressive and problematic. Let's do this shit.
I'm gonna be honest. In a way, I am surprised we really didn't bring that up ourselves, but thank you, Keith, for that one. All right. Next, we have JC, who says, good old Final Fight. Although the side-scrolling beat-em-up genre has evolved since the debut of Final Fight, its DNA is very much ingrained in a lot more recent releases in the genre. Capcom was on fire around this time period, and it shows in the overall package that is Final Fight. The three main characters feel different but are a joy to control, the bosses were fun to rumble with and had some interesting designs. Despite some finding it repetitive after a while, Final Fight has a decent running time, and remains fun for the vast majority of the experience. Although it's not Streets of Rage 2, the finely balanced gameplay, upbeat soundtrack, and cool character design, courtesy of some timeless sprite work, add up to a game that set the template for the genre, and it should be experienced at least once. As a bonus point, the Sega CD port is just sublime, and Final Fight 1 on the GBA allows the players to unlock some cool Street Fighter Alpha skins for the characters, while also being a pretty decent port of the original. Thank you, JC. That was very thorough.
Lethko of Afterglow Podcast. Final Fight is a game I loved as a kid. The graphics on the SNES were mind-blowing at the time. When I was younger, I didn't know about the stuff dropped from the arcade version, like the extra stage and the main character, because I hadn't played the arcade version. Later in life, I built a MAME machine emulated Final Fight and had a blast with the extra goodies. But even later, I discovered the Sega CD version. Easily the best version of the game. An incredible soundtrack just amps this game in a way the others couldn't. Yes, there were better fighters out there. Hello, Streets of Rage. Hi. But this game was dripping in eye candy. If you were an early SNES owner, this was a good pick from that early first-year window. Yes, it absolutely was. And thank you, Lethko.
All right, next is Saxpit, aka Alan Bingham, who says Final Fight is a game that I remember fondly and nostalgically, but never actually owned back in the day. My outlet for playing this game was at my best friend's house on his Super Nintendo. Shout out to Justin Crosby. Whenever we had sleepovers at his place, we'd take a whole bunch of our NES, Super Nintendo, and Game Boy carts, flip them face down, mix them up, and take turns randomly picking a game to play. We followed this formula regardless of whether the game was single player or multiplayer. Final Fight was one of those games that always ended up in the mix. Unfortunately, due to poor decisions on Capcom's part, the Super Nintendo port of Final Fight was single player only, so we had to pass the controller back and forth. Also, why was Guy left off that version? Was there really that bad of a cartridge memory restriction? Anyway, clearly, this game doesn't hold a candle to something as elite as Turtles in Time or Streets of Rage 2. Also, the SNES port that I played is an even more simplified version of an already simplistic beat-em-up. Regardless, it was always a fun time that I'll always remember fondly. Thank you, Alan. And that concludes our pontifications from our patrons. So we will move into whether or not we think this game holds up today. As is tradition, myself and Shane will go first, and we will give our guest the final word. So, Shane.
Yes.
Does this game hold up today?
Yeah, man. Yeah, it does. It's, some minor quibbles about controls aside, it's still pretty fun. I can definitely see how this is a far better experience as like a couch co-op kind of thing. But even if you're playing by yourself, it's not like you're actually at the arcade, so you can just keep continuing. I definitely lost track of the number of times I punched a virtual quarter into the machine again to keep going on that collection on Steam. I died many times, but even with that, it's one that I could see that if I played it enough, I'd probably get to around the same spot as I am with Turtles in Time, and that I feel like I could probably get pretty adept at it. It's never going to control quite as well as a game like Turtles in Time, but then again, you're comparing something that was, based on this in many ways. So that's kind of an unfair comparison when you really think about it. So no, I think it definitely holds up well enough. I would kind of go with the general sentiment, though, that if you're going to play it, the Sega CD version, I think, is probably the way to go. I would need to double check, and maybe one of you can keep me honest on this, because I'm going to be honest, I have no idea. But do we know what the Steam version of this game is based on? Is it the Sega CD or is it arcade? Do we have any idea?
Arcade.
Arcade. Okay. Well, I mean, that's still a totally serviceable way to do it, because that's the way I did it. But I would say either that, just for like the sake of simplicity, just for, ease of access and whatnot. Or, the Sega CD is pretty good. I mean, if for nothing else, the soundtrack is so much better. But yeah, no, it's still a good time. It's a little rough around the edges, but that's okay.
So I'm going, from my take here, I'm going to kind of go the same line as Golden Axe. Is this better than Golden Axe? Yes. Does this hold up better than Golden Axe? Yes. Does that mean this holds up today? No. And the thing is like, it's not that it's poorly put together, or it's not an experience that is broken by any means. It's not a bad game. Final Fight is, I can't call it a bad game. It's nowhere near being a bad game. The problem is that it was a game that, if you could kind of do the crawl, walk, run evolution of beat 'em ups, Double Dragon crawled, Final Fight walked, and then there were beat 'em ups in between, and then Streets of Rage 2 sprinted. And I think we've mentioned enough before, specifically myself and Phil here, that it got to the point where Capcom was creating beat 'em ups that surpassed Final Fight in almost every way. And I also mentioned I thought Mighty Final Fight for the NES on inferior hardware, being an 8-bit demake, essentially a few years after Final Fight came out, being a better game. I think that's more of a testament that the rest of the industry, to include Capcom, caught up extraordinarily quickly to what made this genre special. And this set that standard. And that's awesome. But when you look at a building, you don't talk about the best foundations and beautiful architecture. You talk about how great a finished product looks and the smart design on top of that foundation. Not to knock the foundation itself, it's extraordinarily important. But in terms of, I mean, if you want to say the foundation holds up, that's the most important part that would hold up, I guess. But in terms of video game, does it hold up? Like, slightly, no. I know the thing that really holds it back is just the brutal arcade difficulty. Even with like the Sega CD version, you only have a limited amount of continues in order to beat that game. It's going to take a lot of practice, which I understand a lot of people like, and a lot of people dig that arcade difficulty. I just see it as more of a detriment than a benefit nowadays, especially when there's games of that era that are easier to learn, get into, and more balanced to the player, while having a better sliding scale of that difficulty if you want to ramp it up or decrease it. Like, it's among its contemporaries, just not in the modern era. So for me to say it holds up today, I mean, no, but it's not like a hard no. It's not like this game is bad no. It's not I hate this game. It's just that it provided a template for a lot of people to build on, and boy howdy did they. It's just that this got left in the dust as a result. So that's why I'm saying no here. Phil, you got the final word. And you got a tiebreaker.
Okay. Well, I'm going to say something that I don't think is controversial, but might get me in a little trouble. When we say, does a game, especially a retro game, hold up? Especially in our modern moment of living, because all we have is the modern moment. We don't really have the future, and the past is the past. I'm of the opinion, and this is strictly my opinion, that 9 times out of 10, based upon where we stand in the moment, a lot of old games simply do not. And this is not saying anything about their quality, their story, the effort, ability. It's just in the same way that we don't drive Model Ts anymore. Model T was the great standard, set the blueprint, but now, about 100 years have passed and we're all driving Nissans and Kias and all that sort of stuff built upon it to be sleeker, faster, more efficient. In a lot of cases, unless we're talking bargain basement shit, even the most 1 to 2 man indie games on Steam will still function better than many of the retro games out there. I think really when we say does a game hold up, we have to do a little bit more of a comparison study in its historic roots. Again, we're those of us, I think, who do this podcasts and stuff like that, whether we signed up for it or not, we are in a certain way historians. We come at it and we have to say, all right, in a retrospect, in comparison to the time, in comparison to its day, its moment in history, how did this do? And I will say, for its comparison, for its moment, for its time, Final Fight is an instant classic. And anyone interested in this period or this genre or this particular game, I will say absolutely, play this. But I want you to keep in mind something. A mere 3 years later, 1992, as we've mentioned so much on this podcast so far, Streets of Rage 2 just beat the absolute pants off of it. In animations, in abilities, in responsiveness, almost in a second, kind of leaving it in its frozen chrysalis of time. Capcom itself would do the same thing, as I said, with Captain Commando, with Chronicles of Mystara, with The Punisher, with Alien vs. Predator. And as Chris said, this is a template, and boy howdy, did people build on it. And for about half a decade, you couldn't take 2 steps into an arcade without falling over a beat 'em up that in some way was inspired, ripped off, or learned from Final Fight. Now, I can also see Shane's, Chris, I can see your point in this as, does it kind of hold up? No. And yeah, looking at it in 2025, it's rough. It is rough in a lot of cases. However, ultimately, how do I feel about this game? As I said beginning, this is a foundational game for me. The reason I love the beat 'em up genre is thanks to Final Fight. I do believe it still holds up, but people, listeners, I want you to remember, it's not just nostalgia talking. There are good points, but there are bad points. And compared to something like the recent Streets of Rage 4 game, the recent Turtles game that came out, that beat 'em up from a couple years ago, it's showing its age. It's absolutely showing its age. Does that mean it's bad? No. It just means it's a timepiece. And I think it should be treated with that level that it is a timepiece. I'm not asking for ungodly amounts of respect, but I do ask you, if you haven't tried it, at least give it a shot for yourself. Who knows? You just may like it.
Very well said. All right, well, that concludes our episode on Final Fight. Thanks for stopping by, Phil. It's been great having you here. Really do appreciate it. And that closing comment is exactly the reason I love having you here. You always articulate your points very well, so thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, so before we close this out, where can people find you on the interwebs?
Where can people find me? Oh, I love this part. Now, Deleted Saves Podcast is my podcast. If you haven't given it a listen, please, I would ask you to try it. You don't have to agree with me, but just keep in mind, I do speak from the heart. I do speak from the brain. It's a short form podcast where I talk about the various games that I have played and that have stuck with me long after I turned off the system, long after I may no longer have the system, long after I deleted the save file for the game. Where can I be found? I still have a presence on Twitter, although fuck Elon Musk. I don't use it very much because I'm getting more and more horrified by that site every day. And it's at Deleted Saves if you wish to follow me. On Instagram, which I haven't touched in a while, again, this sounds bad, but it's deleted_saves_podcast. I'm most active of recent on Blue Sky, where it's again at Deleted Saves, Blue Sky.podcast. I no longer have a Patreon. No longer have a Discord. It was deader than dead, and I just decided maybe I'll just hang. I do have a Patreon. If you feel like anything I have said is worth your time and worth your $1 a month, please go to Deleted Saves Podcast on Patreon. I start out at $1. I go up to $2. I just added a $5 tier, but again, times are tough. I'm not asking for money. I'm still going to do this whether it's, I get money or not, but you do help support my show. I do love my patrons. Hello, all 5 of you. I really appreciate you guys.
Mhm.
I'm sure they would love to have some other people to talk about how wrong I am on various episodes of my show. But generally, you can find me on Spotify. You can find me on Apple. You can find me where just about every decent podcast is sold.
Excellent. Thanks again. Appreciate it. And go check out Deleted Saves. Go check out everything. Go click on the things, as we have said repeatedly. What in terms of us, Shane?
Yes.
Where can they click on the things?
Well, if you are interested in going to find where they serve up the less above board sort of media, then you might be able to find us. We are not where the finest podcasts are offered.
Well, somehow we've managed to sneak our way in.
Yeah, well, don't tell them that. They're not supposed to know.
Yeah, it's supposed to be.
Anyway,
I did. I snuck in.
Yeah, exactly. They left the back door open. Anyway, so if you want to check out all the things that we've got going on, first of all, if this is your first time dropping in, hi. We hope you enjoyed your time here. And if you want to stick around for a while longer, boy, howdy, do we have a lot of stuff for you. So we are well over 300 episodes at this point. We are very rapidly approaching 10 years as a show, which is insane. Mostly the people would put up with us for that long, but here we are. And so you can find all that stuff, as well as our Patreon, if you wish to support the show in that fashion, or if you would like to buy some merch, you could do that as well. You know, drip yourself out, as the kids say, I think still maybe. And we've also got socials and things that we sometimes use, not often. But perhaps more importantly, we do have our Discord, and it is public, it is open, and it is free to join. So that is the hip and happening place if you're talking RHP. So I would suggest just jumping in there and joining in on one of the many conversations that are occurring at any given moment. I certainly can't keep track of them all. It has taken on a life of its own. It is its own entity, and I hope that it does not run amok, but you know, so far so good, but I might have jinxed it. But please go in and check that out. It's a good time. And we also have a YouTube and a Twitch channel if you would like to watch us play games occasionally. Chris, if someone were interested in spending the very limited amount of time they have on this planet watching middle-aged white men play games in a mediocre fashion, how would they go about doing that, and where and when?
I mean, that would just be Twitch in general, but
that's true.
You can head over to twitch.tv/retrohangover. We're there at 9 p.m. Eastern time, and we're doing what Shane said. We're also on YouTube during that time, but like the chat doesn't show up on your screen. So
Chris keeps bringing this up in just a roundabout way until I fix it. This is his way of trying to get me to fix it.
I just don't care. That's just me saying I'm just trying to inform the listener, the consumer. It's a bit of a disclosure, so we can't get sued. Anyway, Sunday at 9 p.m. Eastern time. That's when we do our streams. I also have to say, like, boy howdy, have we said boy howdy a lot in the past few couple minutes. I think that's the Retro Hangover record, with the previous amount of times being 0. So we sure have done that. All of us. I don't know why I appreciate that, but I do. So 9 p.m. Eastern time. Boy howdy, will you catch a stream?
Maybe we should swap over to Hot Diggity.
No.
Oh, okay. Well, there is no diggity after all. So, all right. Anyways, semi maybe obscure 90s R&B references aside, with all of that now having been said, until next time,
play with your I like the way you work it joysticks. What is Final Fight to you? What are some good things? Or what am I even saying? What am I doing? I need to reset.
What are good thing that you like about game?
I am not on my game today.
Shane here with a quick message. You know, the one rule Chris and I have always gone by regarding advertisements is this. It has to be something we use and can personally vouch for. If you know me, you know I love coffee. And Bones Coffee Company has been my go-to for home brewing for quite some time now. Their small batch beans come in an impressive variety of flavors like Mint Invaders from Chocolate Space, or Electric Unicorn, which I swear tastes exactly like Fruity Pebbles. And the best part? No added sugar or calories involved, just natural flavors infused right into the beans themselves. Build your own sample pack of 5 4-ounce bags to find out which flavors speak to you, or jump in head first with full 12-ounce bags. They've even got K-Cups. Step up your homebrew game with Bones Coffee by visiting bit.ly/RHPBones. That's bit.ly/RHPBONES.